Craig Berube has finally broken his silence about his departure from the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the more I listened to his comments, the more I realized this wasn't just another former coach reflecting on a difficult season. There were several moments in his interview that stood out, but one in particular completely changed how I viewed the end of his time in Toronto. Here's what I'm hearing. People around the league have been trying to figure out for months exactly why the Maple Leafs decided to move on from a Stanley Cup winning coach after only one season. And now Berube himself has provided some of the clearest insight we've had since that decision was made. What surprised me the most wasn't frustration or anger, it was honesty. Berube spoke openly about his final meeting with Maple Leafs management, and according to him, he actually walked away from that conversation believing things had gone well. He explained that the organization asked for his thoughts on virtually every part of the team. They wanted his evaluation of the roster, the coaching staff, the direction of the franchise, and areas where he believed improvements could be made. Berube even described it as a good meeting, which makes what happened afterward even more surprising. From what I've been told, exit meetings like these are often detailed and collaborative. Organizations want honest feedback before making major off-season decisions. In Berube's case, he said he left that meeting with the impression that his future in Toronto was still very much alive. That's why the eventual decision to part ways came as a genuine disappointment. Now, it's important to separate confirmed reporting from analysis. Berube has never claimed the Maple Leafs misled him. He hasn't accused the organization of acting in bad faith, and he hasn't criticized general manager Brad Treliving or anyone in the front office. In fact, one thing that really stood out to me was how respectful he remained throughout the interview. Even after losing one of the biggest coaching jobs in hockey, there wasn't bitterness in his voice. My take on this is that Berube understands the business side of the NHL. Coaches know results matter, especially in a market like Toronto where expectations are sky high every single season. But what really caught my attention came next, because Berube didn't spend most of the interview talking about the decision to fire him. Instead, he started talking about himself, and that's where this story takes an unexpected turn. Berube admitted there was one coaching decision he regrets more than anything else during his time with the Maple Leafs. He said that if he had the chance to do it all over again, he would never make the same choice. That's a remarkable admission from a coach with his resume, especially someone who has won a Stanley Cup and built a reputation around accountability. The latest information I'm hearing is that Berube arrived in Toronto with a very clear vision of how he wanted the Maple Leafs to play. He envisioned a team that was harder to play against, more physical, more committed defensively, a group capable of succeeding when the regular season gave way to the intensity of playoff hockey. Anyone who followed his previous coaching stops knows that style wasn't a surprise. It has always been part of his identity behind the bench. But according to Berube, somewhere along the way, he drifted away from that philosophy. Rather than fully committing to the system he believed in, he admitted he tried to accommodate his players more than he should have. His own words were striking. Looking back, he said, "If I had to do it all over again, I would never have done that." Here's how I read this situation. Berube wasn't blaming his players. He wasn't saying they forced him into changing his approach. Instead, he appeared to be taking personal responsibility for moving away from the identity he believed would give the Maple Leafs the best chance to succeed. That's a level of self-reflection we don't often hear from NHL coaches, particularly so soon after losing their jobs. League sources have long suggested there were questions about whether Toronto's roster was the ideal fit for Berube's preferred style of hockey. The Maple Leafs have been built around elite skill and offensive creativity for years, while Berube has consistently emphasized structure, forechecking, physical play, and accountability. Those philosophies aren't necessarily incompatible, but getting an entire team to embrace that identity takes time and complete buy-in. The question now is whether Berube believes he compromised too much before that process was ever complete. That question becomes even more interesting when you look at the rest of Berube's comments, because he didn't stop at admitting his biggest coaching regret. He also offered a much clearer picture of what was happening behind the scenes during a season that never seemed to find consistent momentum. Here's what I'm hearing. Berube believes several factors combined to prevent the Maple Leafs from fully establishing the identity he envisioned, and injuries were at the top of that list. He pointed to early instability in goal and the loss of key defenseman Chris Tanev as major setbacks. My take on this is that those comments weren't excuses, they were context. Every NHL coach deals with injuries, but when you're trying to introduce a new defensive structure and new habits, losing important players can slow that process dramatically. Berube appeared to acknowledge that reality while also accepting responsibility for the areas he believed he could have handled differently. Another topic that immediately caught my attention involved William Nylander. Throughout the season, there was no shortage of speculation that Berube and Nylander didn't always see eye to eye. Those rumors grew louder whenever cameras caught an animated conversation on the bench or after a difficult loss, but Berube addressed those reports directly, and his version of events was much less dramatic than many people expected. From what I've been told, Berube described his relationship with Nylander as a normal coach-player relationship. He admitted there were disagreements and difficult conversations, but he made it clear that those moments are part of coaching elite athletes. He rejected the idea that there was any personal conflict between them. Here's how I see it. Competitive teams often have uncomfortable conversations. Coaches challenge players, star players challenge coaches. That doesn't automatically mean there's a fractured relationship. In fact, many successful organizations encourage those honest exchanges because they push everyone to higher standards. Berube also spoke positively about Mitch Marner, describing him as one of the emotional leaders inside the dressing room. That's another comment that generated attention because it came after so much public discussion surrounding Marner's future and his eventual departure from Toronto. Rather than criticizing anyone, Berube praised the energy Marner brought to practices and games. To me, that reinforced the overall tone of the interview. He wasn't interested in settling scores. He was simply explaining how he experienced the season. One thing I found especially revealing was the way Berube talked about Brad Treliving. Even after being dismissed, he continued to speak respectfully about the Maple Leafs general manager and the organization. People around the league believe that says a lot about how Berube handles adversity. It would have been easy to point fingers or hint at internal disagreements, but he chose a different approach. He acknowledged that management has to make difficult decisions and that coaches understand those realities when they accept the job. That doesn't mean the questions surrounding Toronto have disappeared. If anything, Berube's interview has reignited the debate about whether the Maple Leafs ever fully committed to the style of hockey he wanted them to play. My take is that this isn't a story about one side being right and the other being wrong. It's about fit. Sometimes a respected coach and a talented roster simply don't arrive at the same identity quickly enough, especially in a market where every playoff disappointment leads to enormous pressure for change. Berube also confirmed that he interviewed for the Edmonton Oilers head coaching position before ultimately withdrawing from the process. That tells me he isn't stepping away from coaching. He's waiting for the right opportunity. And given his experience and championship resume, I don't think he'll be out of the NHL for very long. Coaches with his background are always going to draw interest. As I listened to everything Berube had to say, one thought kept coming back to me. His biggest headline wasn't about being fired. It wasn't about management. It wasn't even about the Maple Leafs. It was about accountability. He openly admitted that he believes he moved away from his own coaching philosophy, and if given another chance, he wouldn't make that same decision again. That's an unusually candid admission from a veteran NHL coach, and it's one that people across the league will remember the next time his name surfaces in a coaching search.